Observing others to understanding yourself. When a person feels impressed by someone, the first natural response is observation. We begin to watch how that person speaks, how they work, how they manage pressure, how they organize their day, and how they deal with people. This observation is quiet and often unplanned. It happens because the mind is searching for direction. It is trying to understand what creates confidence, discipline, stability, or success in another human being. This behavior is not weakness. It is a basic learning instinct. From childhood, humans learn by watching others. We copy, adjust, and improve. Observation is the foundation of growth. However, most people stop their learning at the surface. They observe results but not processes. They see achievement but not effort. They notice confidence but not discipline. They admire outcomes without understanding the systems behind them. This creates a gap between inspiration and action. People know who they admire, but they do not know what to do next. Over time, this gap turns into frustration. The mind keeps asking questions, but life does not change. There is another deeper problem that rarely gets attention. While people spend years observing others, they almost never observe themselves. They can explain clearly what successful people are doing right, yet they struggle to explain how they themselves spend their time, energy, and focus. They know other people's routines but remain unaware of their own habits. This lack of self-observation creates confusion. When a person does not understand their own actions, they cannot understand their results. Most people live on automatic mode. They wake up, react to situations, respond emotionally, repeat routines, and go to sleep without reflection. Days pass, then months, then years. When results do not appear, they feel lost. They say they are working hard, but they cannot clearly define what they are working on. They feel busy, but they do not feel progress. They feel busy, but they do not feel progress. This happens because action without awareness has no direction. Effort without observation does not lead to growth. Observation of others can teach valuable lessons, but it is incomplete unless it turns inward. Watching how others manage their life is useful only when it helps a person question their own behavior. The real purpose of observation is not imitation. It is understanding. And understanding must begin with the self. Without self-awareness, even the best advice remains useless. Many people believe they lack knowledge. They think they need more information, more motivation, more guidance. They read books, watch videos, and listen to speeches. For a short time, they feel inspired. Then the inspiration fades, and life returns to the same pattern. This cycle repeats again and again. The real issue is not lack of information. It is lack of attention to one's own actions. Knowledge without self-application has no power. The truth is simple but uncomfortable. Most people already know what they should be doing. They know which habits waste time. They know when they avoid important work. They know which actions move them forward and which actions keep them stuck. This knowledge exists inside them, but they ignore it. They avoid looking at themselves honestly because self-observation requires responsibility. It removes excuses. It forces clarity. And clarity demands change. Self-observation is not about self-criticism. It is about self-understanding. When a person begins to observe themselves with honesty, patterns become visible. They start noticing how emotions influence decisions. They see how distractions steal time. They recognize how comfort zones limit growth. This awareness is powerful because it brings control. A person cannot change what they do not see. This guide is built on one central idea: real growth begins when observation turns inward. Admiration can start the journey, but self-awareness completes it. The goal is not to become someone else. The goal is to understand who you are, how you operate, and how you can improve with intention. Improvement does not require dramatic changes. It requires clarity, discipline, and consistent effort. Throughout this work, the focus will remain practical. Concepts will be explained through behavior, not theory. The aim is to help you recognize what you are actually doing every day, not what you believe you are doing. There is a difference between intention and action. Growth depends on action. Self-observation bridges that gap. This introduction sets the foundation. It explains why observation begins outside and why it must eventually move inside. It challenges the idea that answers exist somewhere else. Instead, it points toward responsibility, awareness, and deliberate action. Every chapter that follows will build on this foundation. Each one will guide you closer to understanding yourself, working on yourself, and allowing results to appear naturally over time. Change does not start with motivation. It starts with attention. When you learn to observe yourself the same way you observe those you admire, growth becomes inevitable. Chapter 1. Why we feel the need to observe people we admire. When a person feels impressed by someone, the mind naturally moves toward observation. This reaction is not random. It is driven by a quiet recognition that the other person represents something meaningful: discipline, confidence, stability, skill, or control over life. Admiration is not about the person itself, it is about the qualities they reflect. The mind notices those qualities because it senses a gap between what it sees and what it currently has. Observation begins as curiosity. A person starts noticing how the admired individual speaks, how they behave in difficult situations, how they manage their time, and how they respond to pressure. These details stand out because they feel different from ordinary behavior. The mind records them, often without conscious effort. This is how learning has always worked. Before formal education, humans learned survival, skills, and values by watching others. However, admiration often creates confusion when it is not guided by understanding. Many people mistake success for talent or luck. They assume the admired person is naturally different. This belief creates distance. Instead of learning, the observer feels small or incapable. In reality, most impressive traits are built through repeated behavior over time. Discipline looks natural only after it becomes habitual. People observe others because observation feels safe. Watching requires no risk. It does not demand effort or accountability. A person can admire someone for years without changing anything in their own life. This is why observation alone does not create growth. It must be followed by reflection and action. Without that step, admiration becomes passive consumption. Another reason people observe those they admire is to find structure. Human beings struggle with uncertainty. When someone appears organized, focused, or calm, it signals control. The observer wants to understand how that control was built. Often, What they see is not extraordinary intelligence but clarity of priorities. Admired people usually know what matters and what does not. This clarity simplifies their decisions. There is also a psychological comfort in watching others succeed. It gives hope. It shows that progress is possible. But this hope can turn into escape if it replaces effort. When people spend too much time observing others, they delay facing their own responsibilities. The mind stays busy, but life remains unchanged. Observation becomes harmful when it turns into comparison. Comparison focuses on outcomes rather than process. It measures visible success against invisible struggle. This creates pressure without direction. The observer feels behind but does not know what to do differently. This is why many people feel motivated briefly after observing someone impressive, then discouraged soon after. The purpose of observation is not to copy behavior exactly. No two lives are the same. Circumstances, responsibilities, and limitations differ. Intelligent observation looks for principles, not patterns. It asks deeper questions. How does this person manage focus? How do they respond to failure? How do they structure their day? These questions lead to understanding rather than imitation. Admiration should act as a signal, not a destination. It signals areas where growth is needed. It highlights standards that the observer has not yet reached. When understood correctly, admiration pushes attention inward. It encourages self-questioning. What am I doing with my time? Where am I undisciplined? What am I avoiding? Most people stop at surface-level observation. They notice confidence but ignore preparation. They see calmness but ignore emotional control. They admire results but overlook consistency. This shallow observation creates unrealistic expectations. Real progress requires looking beyond appearance and into daily effort. This chapter establishes one key idea. Observation is a starting point, not a solution. It becomes useful only when it leads to self-awareness. The moment admiration turns into honest self-examination, learning begins. Without that shift, observation remains entertainment, not education. Understanding why we observe others is important because it reveals the next step. Growth does not come from watching impressive lives. It comes from applying learned principles to one's own behavior. The following chapters will move from external observation to internal clarity, where real change begins. Chapter 2: What you actually learn when you observe others properly. Observation becomes valuable only when it moves beyond appearance and reaches understanding. Many people believe they are learning when they watch successful or disciplined individuals, but in reality, they are often only collecting impressions. Proper observation is intentional. It focuses on behavior, patterns, and systems rather than personality or results. When done correctly, observation teaches lessons that cannot be learned through motivation alone. One of the first things proper observation reveals is how successful people manage their time. They do not rely on mood or energy. They rely on structure. Their days are not perfect, but they are planned. Time is treated as a limited resource, not something to be filled casually. This understanding changes how a person views productivity. It shows that progress depends more on routine than inspiration. Another important lesson is the relationship between effort and consistency. When observing from a distance, success often looks fast. In reality, it is slow and repetitive. Proper observation reveals that impressive results come from doing ordinary tasks repeatedly, even when there is no immediate reward. This lesson corrects the false belief that growth requires constant excitement or visible progress. Observation also teaches emotional discipline. People who perform well under pressure are not emotionless. They have simply learned not to let emotion control action. They pause, assess, and respond instead of reacting. This behavior is often invisible because it happens internally. Only careful observation reveals how much self-control exists behind calm behavior. Another key learning is decision-making. Effective individuals make fewer decisions because they eliminate unnecessary choices. They simplify their environment and habits. This reduces mental fatigue and increases focus. Proper observation shows that discipline is often about removing options, not adding effort. One of the most overlooked lessons of observation is how failure is handled. Most people only see success, but disciplined individuals experience failure regularly. The difference is not avoidance of failure but response to it. They analyze mistakes without emotional attachment and adjust behavior. This approach turns failure into information instead of identity. Observation also reveals the importance of boundaries. People who manage life well protect their time and energy. They say no without guilt. They limit distractions. This behavior often appears selfish to outsiders, but it is necessary for focus. Proper observation clarifies that boundaries are not rejection of others but respect for personal responsibility. However, observation fails when it turns into copying. Copying ignores context. It assumes that what works for one person will work the same way for another. Proper observation looks for principles that can be adapted, not routines that must be duplicated. This distinction prevents frustration and wasted effort. Another lesson learned through observation is patience. Results do not appear immediately. Those who achieve meaningful progress are willing to stay with a process longer than others. This patience is not passive. It is supported by daily action. Observation teaches that consistency over time matters more than intensity over short periods. This chapter emphasizes one critical point. Observation is a tool, not an answer. It provides direction, not transformation. The real value of observing others lies in understanding what to apply to oneself. Without application, observation remains knowledge without impact. As understanding deepens, the focus naturally shifts inward. The observer begins to ask how these principles appear in their own life. This shift marks the transition from learning to growth. The next chapter will address the major obstacle that prevents this transition, the habit of never observing oneself. Chapter 3: The silent habit of never observing yourself. Most people believe they understand themselves, but in reality, they rarely observe themselves honestly. They experience their thoughts, emotions, and actions, but they do not examine them. This creates a false sense of self-awareness. Without observation, experience alone does not produce understanding. It only produces repetition. One reason people avoid self-observation is discomfort. Observing oneself requires facing habits that waste time, decisions driven by fear, and patterns of avoidance. It removes the comfort of excuses. It is easier to say life is difficult, people are unfair, or circumstances are limiting than to examine one's own behavior. Self-observation shifts responsibility inward, and responsibility demands effort. Another reason is distraction. Modern life offers constant stimulation. Noise fills every quiet moment. Phones, conversations, entertainment, and constant activity leave little space for reflection. Without silence, observation cannot occur. People stay busy to avoid noticing what they are doing wrong. Activity becomes a way to escape awareness. Living without self-observation leads to autopilot behavior. Actions are repeated without intention. Days blend together. Time passes quickly, but progress feels slow or non-existent. People work hard but cannot explain why results do not appear. The problem is not effort, it is direction. Effort without awareness moves in circles. Self-observation also exposes emotional patterns. Many actions are reactions to emotion rather than conscious decisions. Stress leads to distraction. Fear leads to delay. Comfort leads to stagnation. Without observation, these patterns remain invisible. A person feels controlled by circumstances without realizing they are controlled by internal responses. Another consequence of not observing oneself is confusion. People feel lost because they do not understand their own behavior. They set goals but do not align actions. They want change but repeat the same habits. Without clarity, motivation fades quickly. The mind resists effort when purpose is unclear. Self-observation is often mistaken for self-judgment. This misunderstanding prevents people from starting. Observation is neutral. It is about seeing reality as it is, not criticizing it. When done correctly, observation reduces emotional pressure. It replaces blame with information. The habit of never observing oneself is learned slowly. From a young age, attention is directed outward. Performance, approval, and comparison dominate thinking. Internal awareness is rarely taught. Over time, people become experts at reading others and strangers to themselves. This chapter highlights a central truth. Growth cannot occur without self-awareness. Until a person understands how they act, react, and decide, improvement remains accidental. The moment self-observation begins, control returns. The next chapter will move from awareness to clarity. It will focus on understanding daily behavior in detail, how time and energy are actually used, not how they are imagined to be used. Chapter 4. Understanding what you are really doing with your time and energy. Self-observation becomes meaningful only when it is applied to daily life. Understanding what you are actually doing each day requires honesty, not intention. Many people believe they are productive because they feel tired. Fatigue is often mistaken for progress. In reality, effort does not always move in the right direction. Only clear awareness can reveal where time and energy are truly going. Most days are shaped by habit, not decision. People follow routines without questioning them. They wake up, react to messages, handle tasks, take breaks, and repeat the cycle. At the end of the day, they feel busy but unclear. Without observation, the mind remembers effort, not effectiveness. This creates a false sense of achievement. Time is often lost in small, unnoticed moments. Short distractions multiply. Emotional reactions steal focus. Unplanned breaks extend. These losses are rarely dramatic, which is why they are ignored. Over weeks and months, they create significant damage. Self-observation exposes these hidden leaks. It shows how attention is fragmented and how focus is weakened. Energy follows emotion. When a task feels difficult or uncomfortable, energy drops. People avoid these tasks by shifting to easier activities. This avoidance feels natural, but it shapes outcomes. Important work is delayed while unimportant work expands. Without observation, this pattern feels justified. With observation, it becomes clear. Understanding time and energy also requires observing internal dialogue. Thoughts influence behavior silently. Excuses appear reasonable when unexamined. Once observed, they lose power. Awareness turns emotional reactions into choices. This is where control begins. Another important aspect is recognizing peak and low periods. Not all hours are equal. Effective individuals understand when their focus is strongest and protect that time. Without observation, high-energy hours are wasted and low-energy hours are forced. This leads to frustration and burnout. Clarity does not come from planning alone. It comes from review. Observing what was done, how it was done, and why it was done builds understanding. This process is uncomfortable at first because it removes illusion. Over time, it becomes empowering. This chapter emphasizes a simple principle. You cannot improve what you do not measure. Measurement does not require complexity. It requires attention. When a person sees clearly how time and energy are used, improvement becomes logical, not emotional. The next chapter will address a deeper belief, the idea that all knowledge already exists within you, and explain how self-observation transforms experience into understanding. Chapter 5. The truth behind all knowledge is already inside you. The statement that all knowledge already exists within you is often misunderstood. Many people interpret it as motivation or philosophy, but its meaning is practical. It does not suggest that a person knows everything. It suggests that a person already has enough experience to understand what works and what does not. The problem is not lack of experience. The problem is lack of attention to that experience. Every day provides feedback. Actions produce results. Choices create consequences. Emotions appear in response to behavior. These signals are constant, but they are usually ignored. People rush forward without reflection. When lessons are not observed, the same mistakes repeat. Experience without awareness does not become knowledge. People search outside because it feels easier. External advice offers comfort. It promises answers without responsibility. Information creates the illusion of progress. Learning feels productive, even when nothing changes. This is why people consume endless content but remain stuck. They collect ideas instead of understanding themselves. Real knowledge forms when experience is examined. When a person notices how discipline improves focus, that is knowledge. When they observe how distraction reduces progress, that is knowledge. These lessons do not require books or teachers. They require honesty. Self-observation turns life into a teacher. Another reason people ignore internal knowledge is fear of accountability. Once awareness appears, excuses disappear. A person can no longer claim ignorance. Responsibility becomes unavoidable. This responsibility is uncomfortable, but it is also empowering. It shifts control back to the individual. Self-observation builds trust in judgment. Over time, patterns become clear. The mind learns what actions produce calm, progress, and confidence. This understanding is personal. It cannot be copied. External advice becomes useful only when filtered through self-awareness. This chapter emphasizes that information is not transformation. Awareness is. Knowledge grows when attention is placed on behavior, not belief. When a person learns to listen to experience, confusion reduces. Direction becomes clearer. The final chapter will focus on applying this awareness. It will explain how to work on oneself consistently and allow results to develop naturally. Chapter 6. Working on yourself and allowing results to appear. Working on yourself is often misunderstood. Many people believe it requires extreme discipline, long hours, or constant motivation. In reality, self-work begins with consistency, not intensity. It is the ability to apply awareness to daily behavior and make small adjustments repeatedly. Results appear as a natural outcome of this process, not as something forced. The first step in working on yourself is acceptance of reality. This does not mean satisfaction with limitations, it means clarity. When a person knows exactly where they stand, improvement becomes possible. Denial delays progress. Honest observation creates a starting point. Without it, effort lacks direction. Self-work should focus on behavior, not identity. People often label themselves as lazy, unmotivated, or unfocused. These labels create fixed beliefs. Effective self-work avoids judgment and focuses on actions. What was done today? What was avoided? What was repeated? Behavior can be changed. Identity follows behavior over time. Consistency matters more than ambition. Small actions repeated daily create momentum. Many people fail because they aim too high and act rarely. Sustainable growth comes from manageable effort. This builds confidence and reduces resistance. Progress becomes part of routine rather than a struggle. Measurement is essential. Without measuring actions, improvement remains emotional. Tracking effort creates objectivity. It shows progress even when results are slow. This prevents discouragement and keeps attention on the process. Results appear gradually. They are often invisible at first. This delay tests patience. Many people stop just before progress becomes visible. Understanding this prevents premature quitting. When effort is consistent, results are inevitable. Working on yourself is a long-term commitment. There is no final stage. Growth continues as awareness deepens. The goal is not perfection but clarity and control. This chapter closes the journey from observing others to understanding yourself. When observation turns inward and action follows awareness, change becomes natural. Results are not chased. They appear as a consequence of disciplined self-work.